Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be taking my Pygame script and making it look a little more like an actual game by adding objectives to a game map. I could have just added objectives to my example map, but that map wasn't really built with any objectives in mind, and it lacked detail since it only uses 2 tiles over and over. So my first step was to create a better looking map that made more sense to play on. I started by cutting out some more tiles from my Castlevania background and placing them in their own folder. This time I cut the actual 16 by 16 pixel tiles that were in the background rather than the 32 by 32 pixel blocks of repeating images. Using these tiles I can create a nicer looking map. The original source code for my game used an array of letters to show where the platforms were and where the background was. This made it pretty easy to design levels with just a text editor. It works just fine when there are only 2 tiles, but since now I have almost 30 tiles to work with, it would be very difficult to design a level with just a text editor. You really need to be able to see the tiles the letters represent, so for this kind of level design I would need to have a map maker. I could have used Pygame to create a map maker for my game, but I wanted something I could put together fairly quickly, so I created a map maker using JavaScript. In my graphics folder I have an HTML file called mapmaker.html, and when I open this file it will bring up my map maker. Essentially what I have is a grid of HTML image tags, and I have some image tags of the available tiles here on the right. All I have to do is click a tile on the right and add it to the map by clicking a square on the grid. It's simple enough to use, although the grid does have a lot of tiles that need to be placed, so I added a fill button to save myself some clicks filling in empty space. After the level is designed, I can click the Save button and JavaScript will generate an array of letters that I can copy to my Pygame script. Originally I wrote out this code to add it as an array in the script itself, but later I found out it was easier just to read the array from a text file. So I created a level.map text file that contains the lines for the array. Not only did it make the array easier to add to my game, it also made it possible for me to have multiple maps that I could switch between by calling different map files. Having the array be lines of plain text also made it easy for me to add a load function to my map maker, so I can pass the array into the map maker and load any maps that I've done. This is where JavaScript isn't really the best choice for a map maker, since it can't actually save and load the map files themselves. But for a simple editor, it will work for building a basic level. In my first attempt to build the level, I tried to go with the spacing of the tiles that was used in the Castlevania background, and it didn't turn out as well as I thought. It looks alright when you first load the level, but once Mega Man hits the ground it no longer looks right. The ceiling is no longer visible and the floor takes up a third of the screen. I think this is because in the Castlevania background that part of the level was at the bottom of the game map, so using that spacing doesn't work out so well at the top of the screen. I decided to just start Mega Man at the bottom of the screen, although first he just had to fall to the bottom of the screen since I didn't know what starting coordinates to use. In one of my previous videos I created a display to show the player's coordinates, so all I had to do was turn this display back on and find out where Mega Man landed. Then I could start Mega Man at that point on the map. With Mega Man starting at the bottom of the level, I could finish making my game map look more like the Castlevania background I have. So this is the map that I made. It's a little small, but it does have the look I was going for. I was able to add some detail to the background and to the tiles on the floor. Over to the right I have some platforms and a staircase leading up to the left. You need to use one of the platforms on the right to get to the staircase, but the rest aren't really needed for anything. In a more complete game, the highest platform would be a good place to put a power-up or item of some kind. Although in this game it would probably be a fairly weak item since Mega Man's controls are so floaty he can easily reach the platform just by jumping from the top of the staircase, and none of the other platforms are really needed. If this was going to be a Mega Man game, then I would probably start Mega Man out with really tight controls at the beginning of the game. Then later he could get an anti-gravity upgrade or something that allowed him to make longer jumps and reach platforms he couldn't get to before. But since I just want to make a complete level at this point, I'm not going to worry about the player's controls for now. So the next step would be adding some enemies to the map. The Goombas in my example level were on a fixed track that were the same for every Goomba because every Goomba was created from the same Goomba object. So only the first Goomba on the map is at the correct starting point to turn on the platform at the right spot. Making a separate Goomba object with a built-in track would be pretty inconvenient when placing several enemies on the map. So I updated the Goomba object so I can define the length of the track when the enemy is created. In this example, the Goomba has a very short track that it can move on. And in this example, the Goomba has a larger track to move on. Since the track length is passed into the Goomba object when it's created, each Goomba I place on the map can have a different track length. Having a Goomba guarding this first hallway seems like a good place to have an enemy, but when the script first starts, the Goomba is moving away from the player, which doesn't make him very imposing when starting this map. So I also added a way to pass in the Goomba's X velocity to the object to change its starting direction. Changing the Goomba's direction and shortening the track will make the Goomba just start assaulting Mega Man right out the gate, although that wouldn't really be very fair to the player, especially since passing the object's X velocity can also be used to change its speed, and the Goomba can super assault Mega Man, but that isn't really what I'm looking to do. I decided to have the Goomba moving towards the player from the far end of the map. He does turn around before he actually reaches Mega Man, but there's no way for someone who's never played the game before to know that, so it is still imposing while giving the player sufficient time to react. I could add a second Goomba to this hallway to make it a little more difficult for Mega Man to try to jump over the enemies, but since Mega Man pretty much hangs in the air forever and can easily take out both the Goombas with one shot from his Buster Rifle, I decided just to place a second enemy at the next strategic point on the map. So in this example, I have the second enemy guarding a platform that Mega Man needs to use to get to the staircase. Although, to me, it does look a little odd seeing Goomba guarding a platform, since typically in Mario, Goombas will walk clear off of platforms instead of turning around. But since it's the only enemy I have in the game so far, it's just going to have to be an all-purpose enemy, rather than having its own unique characteristics. After adding the Goomba to the first platform, I just added one more to the last hallway in the upper left-hand corner of the map. Since this map is pretty small, I'm going to say this is enough enemies, and I can add the last two things my game needs for this to be an actual level. First of all, there needs to be a game over if Mega Man loses all his health, and second, there needs to be an exit at the end of the level. Since the health bar is the first thing I would expect to see when I run the map, I decided to start with that. Typically, a health bar would use some kind of graphic to represent the player's life total, but I wanted to start with something simple, so I just used a string of lowercase l's. It looks enough like a health bar, and all I have to do to add it to the screen is change my coordinate display to show the player's life total instead. Now that the life meter is on the screen, it needs to go down when Mega Man takes damage. I could have written a function to add and remove single L's from the life meter string when Mega Man takes damage, but I wanted something even easier than that. So I created an array of all the different lengths the life meter could be at. The first element in the array is a blank string for when the player has no life left. At index 1, the string contains one lowercase l. At index 2, the string contains two lowercase l's, and so on. This way, I can use the player's current life total as an index in the array to change the string to whatever it needs to be to match the current life total. After I add the current life total variable to the player object and have it decrease when the player collides with an enemy, I have the display show the life total string at the index of the current life total, and the meter works just fine. The Goombas do tend to do more than one damage when they collide with the player, but that's a result of the collision code, not an error with the meter. Having the Goombas do more than one damage isn't really a problem. Although I did notice that if you walk straight at the Goomba and don't stop, it will clear the player's life total in no time at all, resulting in what would be an instant game over. This is something I would want to fix eventually, but right now it doesn't actually pose a threat to adding my game objectives. Avoiding the enemies is an objective after all, so if the player dies instantly, it's just part of the challenge. Now that the player has a life meter, there should be a game over screen when the player has no life left. Most games would have an animation of the player dying, but I decided the easiest way was just to have the game stop updating the screen and display a game over message. A little uneventful, but it gets the point across. It's now possible for the player to lose the game. So now there just needs to be a way for the player to win the game. Depending on the type of game, there can be different ways to complete a level. I could have it so the level is over when all the Goombas are destroyed, but since I'm not really planning on making a shoot 'em up game, I decided to have the player complete the level just by getting from one end of the map to the other. On this map, the other end of the level is in the upper left-hand corner of the map. Once the player reaches the upper left-hand corner, a level complete message will appear and the game will stop updating. Although this might be one of the easiest maps ever, it is a complete level, and it offers a lot of valuable starting points for making further additions to the game. Just by playing through this map once, I already know I'll need a map editor that can generate much larger maps. I'm also going to need more than 30 tiles to get the kind of detail I want on a map. I also noticed when I was doing the game over and level complete screens that I'm going to need a way to change when the game has control of the screen if I want to be able to add menus to the game. I noticed the player's controls could use a little work, and the map could use more than one type of enemy. But of course I won't worry about adding that stuff until the next video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll tune in for part 5.